Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes. We are with Liberty Lass. She's level 41, 676,000 XP to go to get to level 42, and then we will have to upgrade a few of our SOs to level 45, so it'll be plus 3. But in the meantime, we are trying to get Angus McQueen over here. This little notch here should be where he gives us a story arc. And so we're going to have to do some more missions for him, and we're going to Peregrine Island to deal with Portal Corp. And so we'll head back to the base. And as we go, we're going to talk a little bit more about like AAA game titles. And we may get into some role-playing game news as well. I don't know how far we're going to get and how long these missions are going to be, so we'll just see. But I want to go back and talk about the AAA game post. It was the last episode I made. I posted that episode yesterday, got some comments on it, and now since I'm all caught up, I can respond to some of the comments and talk about them. I think Kiovar made a really good point that that bears repeating when we talk about game companies and like why are they making these terrible games and they don't seem to care about their product and the rest of it. And the reality is that a lot of these companies have become when they get big, they become these publicly traded companies, and people own stock in the company. And then the company's goal goes from making a great game people will love and buy, and we're going to make money from that, to we have to increase the value of our stocks for our shareholders. And the only thing that matters is increasing the value of our stock. Now, logically, you might say, well, if you made a better game and the game made profit, your profits go up and your stock should become more valuable, and that's potentially true. But it's also the case that a lot of times all they're really focused on, is that a boss? No. All they're really focused on is stock prices and dividends and that kind of thing. And so if they can find a way to make the prices of the stock go up so that the stockholders are happy and they can give them dividends and that kind of thing, that's really all that matters. And the quality of the game is secondary. And the other thing, I can't remember if it was Steve Licker or somebody else who talked about this. The other thing is that, the average person who's a fan of a game and wants to play the game for years to come, like me with this game, or most of us with the other games that we play, the games that we love, right? We're thinking about the long-term health of the game, but that's actually not what the stockholders care about. The stockholders care about this quarter, this month, this year. Oh, I thought this guy was dead. Hang on, let's get him. I'm gonna have to fight these guys now. Pain in the neck. They care about this particular time period, right? Whatever number you want to use, right? Usually it's done in quarters, right? So if a company like Ubisoft can, for whatever reason, if there's having nothing to do with the game itself, if they can do something that makes their stock prices go up solidly this quarter, then the fact that they made a terrible game that everyone hates is not going to bother the stockholders because their stock went up, right? Their shares went up. And that's all they care about. And it's rather short-sighted, but, a lot of these people are not going to own the stock that long, right? They're going to hold the stock until the price goes up, and then they're going to sell it, and then they're going to buy into a different company. So why would they care if Ubisoft's prices are going to go down next year? They've already sold the stock off. And I think this is actually a really important point that Kiovar made, that like these guys don't have the same goal that we as players have. We as players, our goal is to play a good game. And the assumption that you're going to have is that the developers are going to make a good game, but that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes what's happening is the developers are doing something that will maximize share prices, and it may not necessarily have anything to do with sales. This is the reason why companies will be doing so badly they have to lay off 80% of their workforce, and the stock price goes up. Because it's not about whether the product is any good. That doesn't affect the stock prices, really. What affects the stock prices is a whole variety of other things that have very little to do directly with the product. It's a very weird concept to me. I mean, I do technically have stock investments in my portfolio for retirement because you just kind of can't help it, and they throw some of that in there, unless you really want to micromanage it, which I honestly don't want to do. Um, but I don't like I'm not that involved in that kind of investing, and it's just not. And one of the reasons is that is just not a mode of thinking that I find logical. The whole like a company that exists to sell a product and wants to sell more product, I understand. A company that doesn't care whether it sells product or not because it's only trying to get the stock prices to go up, and they'd rather do some kind of shenanigans with the books to make the stock prices go up than actually make a good product. I know they do it, but it's just not something that my brain just doesn't work that way. You know, it's why I would never be able to run a corporation. Um, but yeah, I mean that's and the indie companies, right? The indie companies aren't big giant faceless corporations that are trying to jack their stock prices up and give dividends. They're actually privately held companies that don't have stockholders, and therefore all the only way they can make money, the only thing they really care about is making more sales, and to do that they've got to get a better product. And I think that's actually a really good comment, so thanks to Kiovar for that. It really explains why some of the AAA games are doing so badly, or be designed so badly, and the indie games are doing are like they're the indie companies are creating much better games. I thought we were going to Alice Park. I misread that. Sorry about that, guys. We'll head to Kings Row. This outfit's cool, but I missed the cape, so I think for the final season episode, this levels 46 to 50, I think we will go back to some sort of a version of the cape. But I'm going to make one more costume for her rather than go back to one of the old ones, just because I think it's cool, and I like having lots of costumes. There's one of the things they definitely found in City of Heroes, that we're all a bunch of clothes horses, those of us who play these video games, and I certainly am one. So yeah, speaking of the AAA games, the reason I wanted to talk about it again is I've seen a whole bunch more videos about this and reports of certain companies. I'm not going to name them here because I don't want to get into particular games, losing millions and millions of dollars, and some of them are starting to talk about layoffs and everything else. Gee, I don't know if it's going to make their stock prices go up, but it's certainly showing that the AAA games are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Which is selling to just enough to justify the millions of dollars they're spending on development. And these games are losing tens of millions, if not even close to $100 million. And you got to ask yourself, how is that sustainable? I got to think eventually the stock's got to be hurt by that. But you know, there are a lot of companies that have just produced bomb after bomb after bomb, and yet their stock price seems okay, which I don't really particularly understand. But again, I'm not somebody who plays the stock market very much. But anyway, that does introduce another variable, right, that has nothing to do with the quality of the game, and it explains why companies don't focus, the big companies don't focus exclusively on game quality, whereas the little companies, not having investors or stocks or anything like that, have no choice but to focus on game quality because it's basically all they've got, right? And that's what we want anyway, and that's why a lot of us, I think, like these smaller indie games. Versus the big, expensive AAA blockbuster games. So now to role-playing game news, and this is again referring to a what we would call, I guess, a AAA company. Wait, before I do that, I do want to. Somebody was asking me. I was talking about misstreaks, and they were asking me, this hit chance, does that include the debuffs? So far as I know, it does. So let's take a look at the hit rolls here, and we can see right there's my attack. And this says it's 68 chance. This is it here, and I rolled a 46, right? So that is showing, right? 66 chance, 66. So this is not showing my base to hit. This is showing the last hit chance after all buffs and debuffs were applied of my character, right? I had a 64.7% chance according to hit rolls, and we rolled a 15.07, so we hit. All right, so somebody asked about that because I had done a miss streak. I'd gone through a miss streak of like 3 or 4 misses in a row, and I had 70-something% chance. And the person said, "Are you sure you have that? Are you sure you're not being debuffed?" Yes, this is the total after all buffs and debuffs are applied, so far as I've been able to tell, and so far as I've ever known. Right now, if that's not the case, then somebody please make a post confirming that it is not the case, and then we'll know. But I'm almost certain, right? Because if you watch like what happens when my character gets debuffed, these numbers go down. So if you go back and watch where we were fighting the Circle of Thorns guys that debuff you, there are times when this goes down to 8% to hit, right? And that's why I cannot hit. And then I just back off and say, oh, there's no point, right? Or if you look at when I was fighting, look at this guy, right? 35%. Now that's not a debuff to me, that's a buff to him, right? 33%. But you see where it says deflected, right? Deflected. And if you look at the hit roll, it's showing that I had 35%. The deflected means that the 35%, I rolled a 60, I would have hit if he hadn't been buffed, right? And so the reason it shows that deflected rather than miss, it always used to say miss, 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 no matter what. And players, again, started questioning the hit rolls and whether the game was bugged in some way. And as a response, the developers put in the deflected thing so you could see that you aren't just missing, because this percent wasn't there, right? You aren't just missing. You're missing because this thing deflected you, right? Because you couldn't see what your percent to hit was. You were estimating. And people didn't know what the buff of the Guardian is, right? I have an 89% to hit with that with this AOE. So let's wait until it comes back, and we're going to throw it on the Guardian, on the drone, right? And that's also 89%. Is that real? I thought they had 35%. So it must be AOE. So it's not defense against AOE. It must be defense against melee and range, right? And then you put the buff on and you throw total focus in there, and then your chance to hit is 68%, but we missed, right? And then this one, 70%, and we hit, right? And so if our normal to hit would be 75, and the Guardian takes us down to 40, then any number you roll above a 75 is going to label miss. If you roll between a 40 and a 75, you missed him because of his buff to himself, it will say deflected, so that you know that you rolled well enough to hit, but he deflected you, right? And that's just their way of trying to show you that their game isn't bugged. That was the original intention behind it. All right, so now we're going to go to role-playing game news. And there's a big one going on in Dungeons & Dragons. I don't know if you guys have seen it. And I don't normally like to do a lot of content about D&D or D&D Beyond because I've moved on from that game. But so let's sort of explain things a little bit. Up until this week, since the beginning of D&D Beyond, you've been able to buy individual items as parts of books without buying the whole book. And this week, without warning anybody, they took that off of the website, and so people are freaking out because they used to like that feature. And then to make matters worse, people who've bought those things are reporting that they can't actually use them on the website. So let's talk about kind of 45%. Let's talk about kind of what's going on and the origins of this and the history and why I think it's happening and what I think is like what's really at the heart of all this. This combines with the OGL scandal and everything else that's gone on, except maybe the Pinkertons, because that was a Magic story and not a D&D story. And if you don't know that story, it's hilarious, but also disturbing. Look it up. Magic the Gathering Pinkertons. Or Wizards of the Coast Pinkertons, and you'll find the story. So let's go back into the past. Dungeons & Dragons was available on a variety of virtual tabletops such as Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds. Not a lot of people initially were using those platforms. They became much bigger during the pandemic. But we're back in like 2016-17. Around that time, Twitch, yes, the same guys that do video stuff, created D&D Beyond, or they subsidized it or something. The original idea of D&D Beyond was that you could look up stuff from the books piecemeal. Like, that is, you could, instead of having a whole book to look at, what you would look at would be an indexing system, a search system, and you would search for I don't know, the light spell, and it would just show you the text of the light spell so that you could read it. And then, in addition to that, they created a character sheet function. And what was really nice about it is, because they had all of the material from the books basically encoded mechanically into their code base, as poor as it is, you could put the stuff from the rulebook directly onto your character sheet. And you didn't have to actually do your own calculations and figuring out what's appropriate for a class. It would only show you what's appropriate for your class. It would ask you to do the appropriate things for your class, and it would help you build and maintain your character on the character sheet. So basically, what it boiled down to was kind of a glorified character sheet with accompanying text that allows you to read the rules about the thing on your character sheet directly in the interface, so that you don't have to flip through the book pages and look things up. This model didn't apparently make them all that much money, so after a while Twitch decided to pull out, and they sold the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel to a company called Fandom in like 2018, I think. At that point, Fandom was doing the same thing that Twitch was doing, which is they had the rules that you could read in little snippets, right? One chapter section at a time was its own web page. And they had the character sheet, and because they had the rules and the character sheet, you could put elements, individual feats, spells, characters, character classes, races, into your character sheet, and it would figure all that stuff out for you. Now, the way this worked was that the only things you could put onto your character sheet were things that you had, either things from the basic rules, which are free, or if they're from one of the rule books, like the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Player's Handbook, you had to purchase those products on D&D Beyond. The whole logic, and this is one of the things that's been missed in the argument, the whole reason you would ever bother to buy anything on D&D Beyond, because it's not pleasant to read the rules on D&D Beyond. Their interface is terrible, and it's much more pleasant to read it in an actual printed book or a PDF, but Wizards doesn't put those out. The formatting of the pages is terrible. The way the text flows is awful. It's gotten a little better, but it's really pretty bad. And everything is chunked into little chunks of the sections. How to roll to hit, how to do skill checks. All this stuff is chunked in, right? It's little chunks of HTML. And they do it on purpose, because if they let you have the whole section of a chapter rather than little chunks, you could just print it out and then have it, right? And they don't want you doing that. That's the same reason they don't have PDFs, because you could print it out and share it. What is this? Some kind of a bomb? Is this some sort of an event? What's going on? Oh, ambush. I guess it's an event. Oh, okay. Yeah, you guys are white cons, so it's kind of silly. So now you guys can see what would happen if we were fighting white cons. You will see how insanely easy it would be, and why we don't fight white cons. Look at this. Did they do anything to me? Nope. And they died or got defeated super easily. So the main reason, the only reason that you would ever buy anything on D&D Beyond would be so that you could put it on your character sheet, and that the system of D&D Beyond would assess whether you're allowed to put it on there and what conditions you're allowed. I mean, even for me, when I was creating characters in Dungeons & Dragons, and my friends are creating characters, we always did it in D&D Beyond and then imported it into Foundry, because the rules for character creation can get a little clunky, and you can get skill proficiencies from a background, a race, now called a species, or a class, or maybe even a feat. And it's generally a rule that if you already have proficiency with a skill, say from your race, and then you take a background with the same skill, you can pick any other skill you want, right? What is that? Happy anniversary. Oh, this is the anniversary event, guys. Yeah, happy anniversary, City of Heroes. This game is 20 years old. I forgot to mention that. It turned 20 a couple days ago. So happy anniversary, City of Heroes. What does this do? Who knows what could be inside? Oh, it's like a little present. Let's see what's inside. Cool, fireworks. I like that. That's neat stuff. Happy anniversary to City of Heroes. I hope you guys are all playing it. If you aren't, there's no reason not to. Give it a try. It's a great game. And even if your computer's a potato by today's standards, you can probably run this thing, because it's probably amazing by 2004 standards. Anyway, back to the D&D story. So I don't need that. So the only reason to get the stuff is so that you can put it on your character sheet, right? If you're not sure whether you get to pick a new skill or whatever, the system will do it for you. It's all designed. And now there is a bunch of stuff they haven't included from some of the newer books. But back then, they didn't have that many books, and all of the books were in there, and everything was encoded there. And you could create a full character sheet on there, and it didn't really do anything but sit there, right? But it at least allowed you to set up your character sheet. You had all your spells in the character sheet. You could click on the name of the spell, and it would bring up the text. You could track when you used spell slots, when you took a long rest, a short rest. You didn't have to remember what you got back on a long rest and a short rest. That, D&D Beyond took care of it for you, so it made it easier. But the only way to get it to work was if you had bought all the materials on D&D Beyond that you also had in your game books, right? So that you could actually use it. So, like, if you have this Sword Coast Guide to Adventure, or whatever it's called, the Adventurer's Guide to the Sword Coast, and that's where the Bladesinger Wizard was first introduced. They since put it into, I think, Xanathar's Guide or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but originally it was there. Once that book was published, if you wanted a Bladesinger Wizard in D&D Beyond, unless you wanted to do something manual, which you could do, you had to buy the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide so that you could put the Bladesinger, drag it onto your character sheet, or whatever, check box it onto your character sheet, and then that would enable you to put all of that stuff and the various, like, stat bonuses and whatever onto your sheet, and you'd see them for reference, right? So this is basically all convenience to help you do stuff with the character sheet automatically, right? It's an automated way of putting stuff on your character sheet. Even more so than something like, say, Foundry, where, yes, you could drag an item from a compendium onto the character sheet, but Foundry doesn't know whether that item belongs on your character sheet based on the rest of the character sheet or not, whereas D&D Beyond, quote-unquote, knew that stuff, right? And that's the whole reason to buy things. Now, as a convenience and also a sales technique for the players, for the people using the site, one of the things that D&D Beyond allowed was, and obviously Wizards of the Coast allowed, right, because this was all under contract with Wizards of the Coast, but it was run by fandom at the time, so Wizards was just getting a cut. It was possible to buy things a la carte individually. You could decide, instead of buying the entire Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, I'm just going to buy the Bladesinger Wizard. For instead of spending $35 on a book that mostly is for the GM and I don't need as a player, I'm going to spend $4.99 and get the Bladesinger and whatever else comes with it, and that part of the book will unlock for me, and I can put stuff on my character sheet. And this was a huge boon for players because why would a player want to buy a book that's almost entirely campaign materials for the GM just to get the stuff for a character class, right? And the logic of them putting it in these books, of course, is to try and force the players to buy a GM book that they wouldn't normally do because most players are not GMs and most players won't buy a GM-facing book. But if you put player-facing stuff in it, they'll buy it, right? And that's the goal. And so I'm not sure why D&D, Wizards of the Coast allowed the a la carte purchasing, but it's been in D&D Beyond since the 20 teens. And then the idea was that if you bought that, it's a $35 book and you spent $5 on the Bladesinger, if you later decided to become a GM and buy the rest of the book, you got $5 of credit toward the price of the book as a discount. So you only had to pay for stuff once. It's the only reason people would have done it, right? If you had to buy the whole book again, even if you had the Bladesinger, nobody would have bought the individual piece because they would have said that's a ripoff, and it would have been. And so it's been like that for years. Now, eventually what happened is these virtual tabletops during the pandemic took off, and everybody started playing with virtual tabletops. And they got so used to it that a lot of people, even once they went back to in person, used virtual tabletops for character sheets and stuff. And a lot of people were using D&D Beyond, some people were using Foundry, some people were using Roll20 and so forth. Now comes Wizards of the Coast. They see this and they say, okay, this is obviously the wave of the future. We have missed the boat in creating this ourselves. What we should have done was not sold the rights of our stuff to anybody else and created this ourselves. But the last time we tried to do this with D&D 4th edition, it was an utter and complete disaster, and everybody hated it, and nobody used it. So, and we took it offline. And so we didn't really want to do that ourselves. So they farmed out the stuff to Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, figuring let them do it, and they did a much better job than Wizards of the Coast could do, right? And then in the meantime, Foundry came along, and it did a better job than Roll20 and possibly Fantasy Grounds, but definitely better than Roll20. And so now these companies are making, these third-party companies are making a lot of money. And most particularly, people are really using D&D Beyond a lot, and because that's actually got the name, Roll20 is just Roll20, and Fantasy Grounds is just Fantasy Grounds, but D&D Beyond is D&D Beyond. And they said, these guys did what we would need to do. Why reinvent the wheel? Let's just buy D&D Beyond from Fandom. Because Fandom is making money hand over fist with this stuff, partly from these, I don't want to call them microtransactions because they don't work the way a microtransaction does, but partly from these a la carte sales where people are buying individual spells and individual character classes and stuff like that. So the players are actually buying stuff on D&D Beyond, whereas they don't buy stuff from Wizards of the Coast because it's all GM-facing books, right? The gambit of let us put player-facing material in a GM book didn't really work, right? They didn't really get better sales for the Witchlight and Strixhaven books than they got for the other books that are GM-facing. And so, I mean, the sales did okay, right? But they didn't really get, and we're just going to get rid of this mission, they didn't really get, it didn't work the way they were hoping, right? And so, but the individual sales were working. Well, so they said, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's buy from Fandom. But Fandom's making money hand over fist, and they said, we don't want to sell. So then Wizards of the Coast went to them and said, privately, apparently, well, listen, you guys only have a license for 5th edition. We're getting ready to put out 6th edition. This is when they were calling it another edition, right? Which they since have stopped. But at the time they said, we're getting ready to put out a 6th edition, and you won't have the rights to that. So your website's going to become obsolete. eventually, as everybody moves over to the new edition. And so fandom said, all right, we'll sell it to you. But they sold it for an obscene amount of money. I think it was 143 or so $1 million, which is just insane. So now Wizards of the Coast D&D has the D&D Beyond website, and it's now the official D&D Beyond D&D website. But they have a problem because the website stinks, right? It's got a great character sheet and character creator, but it's not a virtual tabletop. And people were using it to just create characters and then scraping the data and importing it into Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds or Foundry. There were even apps for that. The guy who runs the Forge, which is a host for Foundry, Kakaroto is his name. He created web page extensions that you can use to just punch a button and scrape the information from the D&D Beyond website and port it straight into Foundry. And my players and I use this thing. I would say, okay, level up in D&D Beyond to make sure that does all the error checking for us, right? And then when you're ready, let me know and I will import your character into my Foundry shell. And they would just send me an email, say it's ready, and then I'd import it. Now, we still needed access to all of the items, right? They still needed that. So you can do content sharing on D&D Beyond, but somebody had to buy it. Fortunately, my best friend is an obsessive completist, and so he had every book and he shared them all with us, and then I just turned off all the ones like the adventures that we weren't using. And so they had this problem that D&D Beyond is not a virtual tabletop, and it simply could not compete with something like Foundry, which is so much better programmed from the ground up. It is so much better programmed. Too much of the D&D Beyond stuff is just straight up text, whereas Foundry was object oriented. Everything is an object. Every feat, every class, every race is an object, which means you can just drag and drop one object onto another, and you can easily. It's just so much better. Like, it's better, and I don't know about Roll20, but my guess is Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds are all better, also better than D&D Beyond, because D&D Beyond is basically just good for character creation and not much else. And so it's very clunky. Almost everything is clunky. And it's certainly not usable like during play compared to a virtual tabletop. So they said, well, we want to make a virtual tabletop. But the problem is this D&D thing is kind of crappy. So they said, we're going to have to make a whole new virtual tabletop anyway. After we bought this thing, it's basically going to have to go away. And that came up with the idea of one D&D, where they were going to create a virtual tabletop that looks like this, right? It's not going to have these kinds of animations, but you'll be able to put a little hand in and grab and pick up your character and move your figure to another square. And then you'll click the little lightning bolt and a little lightning will arc out and hit the troll, right? So that's what they think, okay, let's do all these video gamey stuff and people will like that, right? But they had this problem, which is that these other companies are already doing this, and they were mostly doing it better. They were way ahead. And so Wizards of the Coast said, okay, we have to get rid of these other virtual tabletops, right? What we want to do, and you got to realize this is their goal, is be the one and only place where you can go to online get D&D. You can't get any of it anywhere else. And so this is where the open gaming license scandal came in, right? They said we're going to revoke the open gaming license so that it is no longer legal for third parties to produce D&D content. And they were hoping, here we go, division line. So this is a Richter storyline, and this is timed, so we're going to have to do that. Board transit. So they said we're going to like basically sunset our permission for other people to use our stuff. But that's cool because we have this one D&D website and everybody can go there and it'll be great. Well, The content creators blew up. The people who used the third-party products blew up. It was super unethical for them to take the OGL away when they told us it would never be taken away, right? And so people got mad. Ultimately, Wizards of the Coast ultimately they had to back down, but before they did that, they tried to say, well, we're going to keep the OGL mostly as is, except for the virtual tabletops, those things, you're not allowed to do it. And what they said was you can do it, but there can't be any animations or anything that reminds you of a video game. Which most of these things do have things like, dynamic lighting and stuff, which is an animation. That somebody pointed that out. Dynamic lighting, how this map is being uncovered. When you do that live on here, if you were seeing like all sorts of dark, and as we come up, the map is being uncovered, that's an animation. And people are saying, guys, that's an animation. Like, you can't even do dynamic lighting. That's ridiculous. And so, it was clearly an attempt to destroy. Well, specifically, they wanted to go after Foundry, but the others too. It was clearly an attempt to destroy the other virtual tabletops. Because, again, remember, keep this in mind. What Wizards of the Coast wants to do is to make it so that the only place you can go to do online D&D, the only place, is D&D Beyond or some other Wizards of the Coast site. But they want to own it. Wow, there are 10 things to do, and I don't see a single one. Oh, there's one. They want to own. They want you to have to go to them. They don't want you to be able to go to Foundry, Roll20, or Fantasy Grounds. So they're trying to sunset these other agreements and bring everybody into their walled garden of D&D Beyond. 1D&D, whatever they're going to call it. So eventually they had to back off the OGL. They put 5th edition into the Creative Commons. What a lot of people didn't notice about this is it doesn't say anything about 6th edition. That won't be in the Creative Commons, right? And probably nobody else is going to get the right to use 6th edition. That's my guess. Now, I don't know. Maybe they've learned their lesson, but the stuff they've done this week suggests that they probably haven't learned their lesson. So things calmed down, right? People were like, okay. Then there were these rumors that they were going to get rid of the a la carte service. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. Right? Well, like this week, what they did was they changed the marketplace. They made it a slick new interface. But in the meantime, in addition to making it a slick new interface, they also made it so that you can no longer buy these piecemeal items. You want to buy Tasha's, you got to buy the whole thing. You can't just go in and buy one feat or one subclass. They did this without warning. Nobody knew it was going to happen. People went to the marketplace and found out suddenly you can't see what's in a book before you buy it, and you can't buy the individual items. And then people noticed that not only that, but you no longer can do the thing where if I bought half of the book, I can pay half price for the rest of the book. The only option was to pay full price on the marketplace. The marketplace didn't even seem to recognize that you'd already bought part of the book. And then to make matters worse, people who had bought items report, I don't know, I've never bought an individual item, but I have no reason to disbelieve them. And multiple people have confirmed it on the forum now. People went in and said, well, if you can't buy a la carte anymore and you can't buy why am I being charged full price for Xanathar's Guide to Everything when I already bought the Bladesinger and these 10 spells? And they went into D&D Beyond and tried to put these things on their character sheet and found that they no longer had access. I don't know if they had stuff already on their character sheet if it got purged, but they couldn't create new characters and they couldn't read these entries. And so they said, what's going on here? You not only did you get rid of the a la carte and the purchasing stuff, but you now took away from me something I've already purchased. And so people went nuts on the forum and were absolutely going bananas. And one of the people on the forum wrote, is Wizards of the Coast just stupid because they do all this stuff? And I don't write on that forum anymore. I don't participate in it anymore. But I was tempted to quote that and say no. Wizards of the Coast is not stupid for doing this. They're not stupid. They think you are. And you're proving them right because you keep buying their stuff even after they do this kind of thing over and over and over again. Right? So, but what's really going on here is Wizards of the Coast. I don't know why I didn't have to rescue the last citizens, but I'm glad I didn't because I hate that map. Wizards of the Coast is still trying to get everybody into their site. And this is why they had to, right? If you have the ability to purchase stuff outside of D&D Beyond, you might do it and not buy it in D&D Beyond. And this is what they want you to do. And the reason they were trying to get people not to be able to do stuff outside of D&D Beyond is because they wanted to force everyone to buy this stuff, the big, expensive stuff. Why? Why can't you buy it a la carte anymore? Why are they trying to force you to buy whole books? One person pointed out on Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, you have to buy the whole book. You can't buy it piecemeal. So this made D&D Beyond better than Roll20 and made you want to go there, and you took that away. Why would they do this? There's a very simple answer, guys. They don't want you to buy books. They don't want you to pay a price. This goes back to the AAA thing. They want you to subscribe. They want to make it so expensive to buy individual books just to get a spell that they can say to you, well, if you don't want to pay $39.99 to get this new book just to get these 3 spells, you can't buy the spells alone, but you could pay $11.99 a month and get access to everything in the game. Everything. Every book, every spell, everything. Right? Maybe there'll be a player tier for $9.99, and then the GM tier where you get all the adventures and everything for $19.99 or something. But this is the same thing as the AAA game debacle, right? They don't want you to buy D&D books anymore. They want you to buy a subscription. And that's not going to happen if you can go to Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, or Foundry. And it's not going to happen if on D&D Beyond you can just buy the individual spells you want. Because it's way cheaper to pay $1.99 for a spell than to do a $9.99 a month subscription fee. Right? This is what's happening. It's the same thing with the AAA games. Right? Same exact thing. They don't want you to pay for their game anymore. They want you to subscribe to their service, and then you get that game and all these other games for free, which you're not going to play any of those games, and they don't care whether you do. They're all old games anyway. It's no skin off their nose to put it on their server and for you to download it and play it on your PC. It's the same reason they want you logged in online to play solo games, not MMOs like this, but solo games. Why do they do that? Because then you need to subscribe. They're trying to get you paying to be online with them. This is what D&D wants to do. This is what Wizards, if they have their way, there will be no physical books are just going to be expensive leather-bound, signed copy collector's editions. This is what they want, their dream. No other website outside of D&D has any text of any D&D rules, and all of the D&D stuff is locked behind a paywall, locked behind a subscription fee that you have to pay to get in there. And the final condition of this, as far as what their plan is D&D Go. It's like Monopoly Go, right? They made $2 billion off Monopoly Go. It's basically an app you play Monopoly on your phone, I guess by yourself. I don't know if you can play with other people, but you can probably play it by yourself. And they made $2 billion on it with microtransactions and everything. That's what they want to do. You get an app on your phone. You're playing D&D on your phone by yourself with an AI just going. I mean, the adventure is already pre-written. Uh, Lost Mine of Phandelver, you can program that in like a video game, and I can just walk, and you just have little NPCs in your party to fill out your party for you, and it's just going to be like Pathfinder, Wrath of the Skeleton King, or whatever. What is good, Pathfinder Kingmaker. That's it. That's their goal. Is you're going to have that on your phone, and you're going to do microtransactions to buy new character classes and stuff like that they can sell you, and it's all automated, and they don't need DMs, and they don't have books, and they can make $1 billion a year. That's what they want, right? And a friend of mine and I have speculated that what's ultimately going to happen if they get their way, and if this is in fact what they do, that what ultimately will happen is that they're going to completely split the audience, and 95% of the audience is going to be perfectly happy with that app, and more people, that's going to become D&D. And then there's going to be this tiny little fraction, 5% of the audience, that still wants to play tabletop because that's the game that they know, right? And that little group of people is probably not going to be playing D&D, at least not modern D&D. It'll be playing AD&D, 3rd edition, Pathfinder, Savage Worlds, Shadow Dark, Dungeon Crawl Classics, one of these other things that's just a tabletop game, because D&D will have become some kind of a video app. It's going to happen. If let's put it this way, that's what they want to happen. They want it to be D&D Go. They see what Monopoly is making. They're like, D&D's got the same brand recognition. We should be able to do that. Will it have everything that D&D has right now? Probably not. It's going to be stripped down to work on your phone. But you'll have millions of people playing it. You don't need to find friends. You don't need to do a session. You don't need to do any prep. You just make up a character, open it up on your phone, and play. Done. And the fear that a lot of people have is that's going to become D&D. And then if you want to play a role-playing game, you won't be able to play regular old D&D. Now, is that going to happen in the current edition? Probably not. But that's probably their 5-year plan. Is to, within 5 years, have D&D Go. And there's rumors that they just got rid of Baldur's Gate 3, right? They ditched Larian Studios, or Larian Studios ditched them. And now they're like trying to do it in-house. And there's some rumor that they're planning to spend like $1 billion creating video games. What do you think that is? It's D&D Go. Or it's going to be a proof of concept of D&D Go. And that's their plan, is to make something like Baldur's Gate 3 that you can play on your phone, so it'll be a stripped-down version, and that anybody can play, and you don't need a GM. Because the GM is, I've said this before, the GM is the weak link. If it's a bad GM or you don't have a GM, you can't play the game. Right? And only the GM buys all of these products, so they need to get rid of all of that stuff. We'll just make that and program it in, right? And then get the players to subscribe. And just give us whatever, they'll figure it out, $10 a month, $15 a month, whatever people are willing to pay. And you just keep getting new content, and it turns into like this. A cheesy MMO, not that City of Heroes isn't cheesy, but what they do will be. And there will be no reason for them to develop, right? The books are going to become to D&D. That's what I think they're planning. What the comic books have become to the Marvel and DC cinematic universe. I mean, Marvel made more money from like the first Iron Man movie than they made in all the history of comic books. The comic books are just source material that are being mined for the big screen stuff that makes the actual money, and the TV shows, right? And Supergirl, right? The Supergirl TV show made more money in its its first good season on CBS. Made more money and got way more eyeballs on Supergirl than all the history of Supergirl comics combined since 1959. Right? There's just so much bigger of an audience out there, and comic books just nobody reads them anymore. And the same thing is going to happen with D&D, I think. Nobody's going to buy the books anymore because it's all done on a video game. And I don't think Hasbro would care. Now, I think there are probably people working within the D&D company who are content creators, people who write the rule books and stuff, probably would be very upset if the game became a video game and went away as the hobby they remember. But those people are not the decision makers. And the decision makers are the ones who want to turn it into D&D Go. And I think it's a virtual guarantee that that's what they want to do. Whether they're going to be able to do it based on how crappily D&D Beyond is programmed is an open question. And their D&D Beyond app was horrible. I couldn't even use it. It was so bad. I don't know if it's been fixed now, but for years it was absolutely dreadful. So much of their stuff has stayed in beta for years. They haven't touched the forums in years. I mean, it's just terrible coding. So if that's what they're doing, I don't know how they're ever going to get D&D Go done. But it's definitely what they want to do. And anyway, that ties into the AAA games because it's the same idea. The AAA games, they don't care if you like their game. They just want you to subscribe to their service. Now, again, the individual devs who are building like the assets like this, like whatever dev made this, whatever dev team made the bases, I mean, it's clearly a labor of love. And I'm sure there are people at these companies like Ubisoft who love what they're doing, but they're not being allowed to do cool stuff because the people running the company won't let them. And that same thing is happening at Wizards of the Coast. Anyway, that's enough of a rant tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed. We're on our story arc. This should take us probably past level 42. And keep making comments, especially now. Not that I didn't read them in the past. I always did, and I responded, as you'll see. But now I can actually answer them in the next couple days because I'm caught up. And I'll be posting this like the day after I shot it. So please keep making comments. Let me know what you think. And until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes.